Um, Thank you for joining us here at the Whitman Override Forum. I'm Justin Evans. I'm on the Select Board for anybody who doesn't know me. With me tonight, Sean Kane, another member of the Select Board, Kathleen Otina, the Chair of the Finance Committee, and we've got several department heads, Mary Beth Carter, the Town Administrator.
Can't really hear you.
Sure. With me, we've got the Town Administrator, Mary Beth Carter, the Superintendent of Whitman Hanson, Jeff Simonak, and the Fire Chief, Tim Clancy, and Police Chief, Tim Hanlon. We'll be here to answer your questions after a brief slideshow. So let me start with kind of where all of this planning began. Back in 2021, the Select Board adopted the following as part of a 5-year strategic plan. We adopted a town mission to provide responsible, sustainable services by fostering strong community relationships for our citizens, future citizens, and visitors. A town vision of a welcoming, collaborative community that values its history to ensure a successful future. And values sustainable, supportive, respectful, participatory government. And so, with that framework, that is why we're here tonight, to try to explain the decision that is coming before the voters in the next couple of weeks. Sure.
Sorry. Sean Kane, member of the Select Board. I think this is important because the mission and one of our strategic priorities is to provide sustainable and responsible services. But the services that we provide to the town, currently provide to the town, this is where the override comes into play. Do we want to keep the services that we currently provide and that our citizens expect? If the answer to that question is yes, then the override becomes necessary because the override is going to give us feedback as to whether those services are still needed by and expected by the people of the town or not. And there's been some debate about this recently. Again, because of our strategic plan and because of the strategic priority to provide these services, when we're developing the budget, when we calculate it, if we can't provide those services and we have a deficit, that's when the override becomes in question, and we present it to the people. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thanks, Sean. And we did want to flag one item from the strategic plan that is sort of at issue right now. And I only want to go through the 5-year outcomes. This is the finance portion of our 5-year strategic plan. That the goal of the Select Board and the town was stabilized budgeting, a financial policy document, a consistent tax rate, growth in beneficial services, public buy-in, and collaboration and communication strategy with educational partners. A lot of that is sort of the decisions that we are facing right now. Some of the proposals, as Sean mentioned, are to maintain the services we currently have, but it would come at increasing the tax rate. So this is where our priorities start to conflict, is where we come back to the public for the buy-in. And so just to take you guys way back, what is Proposition 2.5? It's a Massachusetts ballot measure that passed back in 1980. It sets 2 limits on how much a community can tax in a given year. The one that is most well-known, that we generally talk about, is the 2.5 increase over the levy limit from the prior year. That is 2.5% of the cumulative property. That's not 2.5% of anyone's individual property. So it is the aggregate of all of the assessed value of property can go up 2.5%. The other limit that I don't believe any town has ever run into is the absolute maximum levy ceiling. It cannot exceed 2.5% of the total full and fair cash value of taxable real and personal property in the community. And so the process to raise the levy limit is to seek an operational override, or a Prop 2.5 override. The money still needs to be appropriated at town meeting. This will come into play later in the timeline that we're looking at. It needs to be included in the tax recap submitted to the state. It needs to be accounted for when the Select Board sets the tax rate in the fall. And the gap between a town's levy and its levy limit is called excess levy capacity. If you want to look at a little bit of the history of Whitman and Prop 2.5 votes, the first, 12 or so were rejected throughout. Prop 2.5 passed in 1980. I think it went into effect and it was about 82. And for the first couple of override votes that the town sought, it was a menu of options presented to the town. And the town came back with none of the above. So in 1990, 1991, and 2003, it was several different options put forward to the voters and rejected outright. Beginning in 2007, they started getting more specific, and then the only 2 successful Prop 2.5 operational override votes that we've had was a vote in 2012 for fiscal 2013 to fund the school district, and then a public safety override back in 2017 to add 3 new firefighter paramedics and increase our shift staffing to 6 firefighters per shift. That one I think most of you will remember. So why are we here today? As I said earlier, when revenues exceed expenditures, we have excess levy capacity. But when the reverse happens, when expenditures exceed our revenues, we have a structural deficit. And starting back in the fall, we projected a deficit of about $2 million. I think it started at about 1.7, has grown and has settled in on that $2 million figure. Last year, we did have a structural deficit as well. It was $509,000, and for anyone that was at town meeting opted to use free cash to fund that deficit, which actually set us behind a little bit this year because we now have to make up that additional, that one-time money that was used last year built into the deficit for this year. And I've got a couple of graphs of our revenues versus expenditures. I'll go through these quickly, but these slides will be up online if you want to dig into it a little bit more. But this is just over time. We have kept our expenditures pretty close to our revenues. There were a few periods here where there may have been an increase in personal property or commercial development that would show more new growth, but pretty consistently, we've been running our revenues pretty close to our expenditures every single year. And this is just a detailed look at where our revenues come from. I think this slide is important because it does show that although the tax levy makes up the bulk of how we fund operations here in town, it's also really the only one that's been growing consistently. Local receipts in recent years, we made some adjustments within how we assess things like the ambulance fund that moved back into we now treat that as a local receipt. That increased our revenues a little bit there. But state aid here, which a lot of towns rely on, has been relatively flat for the last, 12 years? 22 years? And I will caveat that this does not include the Chapter 70 money that goes to either Whitman-Hanson or South Shore Tech. Those are regional schools. They get that state aid directly. But Chapter 70 money is the bulk of what most towns receive for state aid. So that is not reflected in Whitman's revenue picture. But I think the superintendent would be happy to tell you that state aid and Chapter 70 funds to the schools has also been flat. We've been minimum aid, hold harmless district now for a number of years. So we do understand that the increase in all of our expenses, as we've been running, our revenues have basically have been covering our expenses. It's been all on the tax levy. Those of you who've been around a long time, and I see a couple former selectmen in the audience that were here for this process, we brought in a consultant back in 2019, John Madden, former finance director in Duxbury, to do an evaluation of what our future expenses and revenues looked like. And the bottom line for his report was that the town would need, with no changes, the town would need a $1 million override back in fiscal 21, and that would increase to a $5 million projected deficit in fiscal 25. We did not seek overrides for either of those amounts because we did make some of the changes he recommended and some additional changes that we continued to develop as we looked at best practices that other communities had. And I just highlighted some of the ones here. I want to pull out just a couple to single out. So the ambulance receipts account, this was a John Madden recommendation. We abolished that, treat it now as general fund revenue. That added, this year it's 1.4 million. We've increased the rate that we bill insurance companies, so it's grown a little bit in recent years. But that was a significant change in the revenue that we took in as a town. The motor vehicle fine account was a much smaller sum of money, but it was the same process. The water sewer indirect costs had previously been applied as basically a source of free cash the following year. It was something that we addressed in the following budget year. John Madden recommended that we treat that as a expense offset, as a budget offset in the current fiscal year. So that did show us basically rather than receiving it as free cash the following year, we now use it to fund the operating budget in the current year. And I think the most significant change here was not a John Madden recommendation, but it was referenced in his report. It was the amendment to the regional school district agreement back in at the outdoor town meeting in 2020, where we switched the way that the district assesses the member towns to the state's statutory method that takes into account each community's aggregate wealth and their ability to pay. That in fiscal 26 shows a projected savings of about $1.9 million And that savings is on the town of Whitman. It is also likely part of the reason Hanson is seeking an operational override at this time, too. Do you want to add anything there? Yeah.
Yeah, so basically, in 2018, I went back and I listened to Mr. Lynham at town meeting, and the way he opened the town meeting, he and Mr. Anderson, basically saying to the town, our revenue doesn't match what we need for our expenditures. We know that in 2018, going into 2019. For that reason, we're bringing in a consultant to help us with this, to form a committee, to really dig into this and develop a plan. Since that time, we've been doing a lot to prevent an override. We've been going out of our way and really digging into some of these initiatives to really find a way to make sure that we can get by without bringing an override to the town. And I think we've done a really good job. Some things that were beyond our control, like COVID, obviously that threw some money into the mix that we didn't expect, that the world didn't expect, obviously. But we did follow a lot of the recommendations, and we have been able to hold off an override until we got to this point. But this really, I really picture this action that we're taking today as a continuation of something that was started back in 2018.
And the last expense piece I wanted to flag was a change in the formula to calculate non-mandated transportation to maximize state reimbursement. So this was a change that the school district made, I think at the urging of several people up here, but you know, Sean Kane notably, was to change the way that non-mandated costs are assessed to or change how much the district considers mandated transportation costs by changing the way that they counted students. Basically, they changed it to a student mile formula. It increased the state reimbursement to the school district and reduced the town's share of transportation costs by about $180,000 this year. We did also explore some new revenue sources. You know, a couple of years ago, town meeting voted to overturn the recreational marijuana prohibition, and I believe the first dispensary got its provisional license in January. They expect to open anytime in the next couple of months when they get final approval from the Cannabis Control Commission. Last year, we increased demand fees, and as I already mentioned, ambulance billing fees. And just a couple weeks ago, we increased the parking ticket fine rate. So what is driving this structural deficit? Right now, it is between both the town and the schools. It's, you know, inflation and supply chain is driving a lot of it. The labor market, it is getting more difficult and more expensive to hire people. I think you can see that we are, you know, I think our employees rightly believe they deserve to be paid at market rate, and we are working within collective bargaining to, you know, hold it to where the town can afford to, but to pay them what, you know, they would get in competitive communities around us. Notably this year, we're faced with a real crunch on fixed costs. Our insurance rate for health insurance went up about 7% this year, but we're lucky that we are a Mayflower Community Compact community, Mayflower healthcare community, because Maya, the one of the state or Mass Municipal Association insurance agencies, as well as the state's GIC, are both going up, you know, about 15%, 15 to 18%. So we are quite lucky that our insurance costs are only going up 7% this year. Pension liability has been a big driver for the town in recent years. We're looking at the end of meeting our full pension obligation, our outstanding pension obligation, in 2030. But that means that we're facing really challenging increases these last couple of years to meet that end point. And then, as I'm sure you're all feeling as well, utility costs are really going out of control. So I think this last one pertains a little bit more to the schools, but special education, in particular out-of-district placements, is a really uncontrollable cost. You know, we are legally required to educate all of our children, and if the only schools that are providing the services it takes to educate those children, if there's only one or two of them, they set the rate, and the district has to pay it. It is unfortunate that it's in a more competitive market right now. Similar to that is school transportation. You know, when they go out to bid on busing contracts every 3 or 6 years, depending on whether or not they roll it over, there's usually only one responsive quote, and it is the same company we've had for quite a long time, and they're the only one that we can use. Most communities run into that same issue when they go out to bid as well. And it's not all the same company. It's just, you know, the only one bidding on Whitman Hanson is the same vendor we've used for a number of years. And the last one I added here was the police reform. We had to staff up a little bit of our administrative positions in the police department just to handle the additional public records requests and reporting requirements that we were not prepared for before that law passed. On the revenue pressures, the Proposition 2.5 limit, if insurance is increasing at 7%, the pension liability is increasing at about 10%, utilities are going up, in the neighborhood of 8 to 10%. 2.5% increases don't cover that. So we are now eating out of our expenses and our salary lines to pay for things that we have to pay. Along those lines, stagnant new growth, something that we saw during COVID was that new growth started to slow down. It peaked a little bit, but then slowed down quite a bit. And now, as we enter the high interest rate environments and potential tariffs on lumber and gypsum, the prime building materials, that is continuing to look pretty bleak in the next couple of years. And flat state aid, as I showed in the revenue slide. It's been, yeah.
The budget pressures that we face, we're not alone in this. If you look across the South Shore today, there are a number of communities going for an override for these very reasons. And I think this is important to really think about, because when you first presented with an override, I think your initial response is, well, what the heck is the management doing? How come they're not more efficient? How come they're not stretching the value of the dollar? And for us, that is a major priority. But some of these things that we're seeing, like with fixed costs, they're really beyond what we can do without limiting services. And I think that is somewhat validated by the number of communities on the South Shore that are really in this situation. And we might share some more of that information, if not tonight, later, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I know off the top of my head, Whitman and Hanson are both seeking overrides. I know the district is paying very close attention to that. For South Shore Tech, they also have Hanover and Norwell seeking overrides. So 4 of the 9 member communities of South Shore Tech are seeking operational overrides this year. I believe Milton is, Duxbury just had one fail. So this is a pretty widespread thing in our immediate area, as well as around the state. So this is the proposal from the select board. We have decided to limit the request for an override to be just the deficit for this year. Impact to the average single-family home, with the average single-family home being, just under $500,000, is an annual increase of about $375.64, or to break it down monthly, $31.30. And obviously, if you have a home valued higher than $495, it would be a little bit more. And if it's less than that, it would be less. I think this next chart does not include the community preservation assessment, so it's 371 instead of 374. But it is it's a clearer way to see this came directly from the Department of Revenue that allows us to input different scenarios for an override. So I can leave it here. You find the approximate assessed value of your home to see what the impact would be to you. Some of the assumptions that went into this calculation are that we're using fiscal 25 numbers for both assessments, for the tax rate. Obviously, going into fiscal 26 when the override would apply, all of that would change, but it would change a little bit. It's not a reassessment year, I don't believe. Yeah, so. And again, we'll put these up online on the town's website. I did want to compare where Whitman stands compared to nearby communities. So right now, this is sorted by average single-family tax bill. Whitman is pretty close to the bottom of our neighboring communities. We are taxing at a tax bill for single-family homes similar to Stoughton and Holbrook. When you look at what we typically consider our peer communities, Rockland, East Bridgewater, Abington, all significantly higher than us. It's one way of saying that we are giving you the best bang for your buck right now. But as the capital debts start hitting the tax rolls, this will change, and if the override passes, we'll come up in line with, the Carver, Pembroke, Halifax of the world. One other data point I wanted to consider, and if you haven't noticed, there's QR codes on any of the slides where outside documents are referenced. That'll go to the town website so you can find the source material. Back in 2018, we did a citizen survey with Bridgewater State University, and these were the 2 questions that I thought most relevant to today. If you were to support a budget override, which of the following offices' budgets would you be most likely to support to receive a portion of the override? And the overwhelming answers were the schools, the police, and the fire departments. That was an optimistic time when we thought we would be seeking an override for growth. instead of maintaining level surfaces. And the other one, if you had to choose which of the following would you like the town to adopt to decrease costs for the next budget cycle, it was pretty overwhelming that force each town department to reduce by a certain percentage, certain proportion. Yeah.
I think one of the messages that we want to share by slides like this is to show you that we're trying to use a strategic process for making decisions like this. Where should we invest our money if we need to have an override? And getting feedback from people through things like surveys is part of the strategic process that we follow. It is also important to note that when the select board is proposing an override, that doesn't mean that we're selling an override, that we're saying we want you to support the override. What we're doing is we're presenting an override for the services that are needed, and then it's up to you to decide whether you do want to support the override or not. So this is meant to be like an informational meeting where you can understand how we came about these decisions through the strategic process, and then you decide.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. There we go. All right, this is the important one. So proposed service cuts in consideration if the override fails. The school district presented theirs at the last school committee meeting. It was 24 employees, I guess to backtrack. For the schools to make reductions to support Whitman's assessment, because we're paying, I guess of the marginal cost over the top, we're paying 60% of that increase, 61% this year. So they need to cut more in order to save us, about $1 million was the request for the district. So they're cutting about $2 million from their operating budget to cover assessments to Whitman, Hanson, and the unemployment costs, because all of these entities are self-insured on unemployment, so we would have to pay the unemployment to the employees after a reduction in force. Whitman Hanson's proposed cuts looked like it was 24 employees, 14 teachers, 2+ admins. I think there was some part-timers or reduction in hours there, and 8 paraprofessionals. So likewise with Whitman, we were lumping some of the, I guess, the public safety and public works departments together just because of the salary impact of those employees. You're looking at typically, I think all the contracts say last in, first out for the purpose of reduction in force. Those entry-level employees make, I would say, similar amounts of money compared to general government, where our salaries are a little bit lower because the hours worked are considerably less. So for public safety, public works, it was about 6 employees, depending on different scenarios, how that shakes out, whether the weight is higher on public safety or public works, whether you can make reductions in shift staffing or not, a lot of things that we have to sort out if it comes to this process. And on the general government side, it was about the equivalent of 8 employees. In some places, we'd be looking at reducing hours, reducing services, taking some positions to part-time, seeing what departments may be able to self-fund. So there's a lot of different things at play here, but to generalize it, it's about 14 employees on the town side to potentially lose their jobs.
It should be noted as well that this is a theoretical exercise. The school committee has not agreed to like a contingency budget. The school committee sets its assessment. Right now, the assessment that they've given us is the one that we're calculating for the override, but they have not gone through the exercise with the school committee to say, if the override failed, this is what we would do. We tried to come up with some sort of an equation that we thought was fair. We shared it with the school committee, with the school administration to get some feedback, but this is not set in stone. What the school committee does and how they set their assessment is not contingent on the override itself. If the override was to fail, the budget would not pass, and the school committee would have a chance to reassess or not. And it's important to know that the school committee does have its authority over the assessment. So paying close attention to what the select board does and how we present an override is important, but also paying a close attention to how the school committee is making these decisions is also really relevant.
Yeah, and part of the challenge in these projections is that we have to make assumptions about how different departments, how different elected bodies are going to react to proposed cuts. And I did include potential fee increases. I know the district talked about athletic and extracurricular fee increases. Something that we have been looking at recently is indirect costs for trash service. Currently, the way that we bill residents for waste management is that we take the total bill divided by the number of trash users and send that out. but then we apply a senior discount that we don't actually cover within the trash billing rate. So that just comes out of the DPW's expense line. Additionally, the services of mailing, billing, the stuff that general government takes to process that, the collector's office, the treasurer's office, the assessor's office, anytime that we seek we're bargaining a contract, the legal department, we do not recover those costs within the trash rate like we would if it were an enterprise fund. Now, we don't need to establish an enterprise fund. We can recover those costs in the structure that we have right now. We just haven't done it in the past. So, roundabout way of saying that we could potentially reduce some of these layoffs by increasing the trash rate for services that are related to trash billing. And likewise, the select board last year looked at what neighboring communities are charging for license fees, auto fees, liquor fees. We did not act on them, but it is something that we have kept in mind. Oh, yeah.
The decisions we made about the contingency budget, there's one school of thought that would say you should look for shock value. You come up with shock value in your contingency budget, and you'll get more attention from the people who are paying attention, and they're more apt to vote for the override, that kind of thing. We opted not to do that. The principle that's primarily driving our contingency plan is that it'll have the least impact possible. That, in a sense, it'll be a contingency budget that it'll still be felt for sure. It pains me significantly to see all these people up there, and they are people, jobs and futures and hopes in the town of Whitman. It's terrible. And it's terrible to have to make these decisions. I think it's probably it is the worst part of my job. But the principle that was driving our decision-making process was to have the least impact possible, not to create shock value. So, if that's helpful.
Yeah, part of our job is to prepare for the worst. And, if we have to find a way to shave $1 million out of the town budget, we want to do so in a way that we can operate a town with. So this is the timeline that we're looking at. So May 5th is the annual town meeting. It's when the operating budget will be presented. This year, we are doing it a little bit differently. So we'll be presenting the budget as entirely a contingent budget, which means that one of the funding sources for Article 2, where it usually says raise and appropriate or transfer from free cash, or used to say use ambulance funds, will say raise and appropriate and contingent on a May 17th Proposition 2.5 vote. So that means that, I guess I'll start with the town meeting. In town meeting, there's an article to seek an override. If town meeting votes yes, we will vote the budget, wait for the ballot results, with the whole thing being contingent. If town meeting votes no, the plan would be to make a motion to adjourn to a future date after the ballot vote so we know whether or not we have that money to spend. The trick with the contingent piece is that if town meeting votes yes on the override, if it appropriates the money within Article 2 in the budget to spend that hypothetical override money, then we would only know, if an override passes at the ballot, we have a balanced budget. But if an override fails, the entire Article 2 is rejected, which means Whitman Hanson, VOTEC, every town department, and the select board would have to come back, propose a new budget, finance committee would have to come back, make new recommendations, the district, and here's the part where there's a real timeline, Whitman Hanson would have 30 days to reassess the towns. As you saw last year, Hanson rejected their budget, and they reassessed the same number back to the towns, but they would have 30 days to reassess. And then the select board would have 45 days to call a town meeting to vote on that reassessment. Those are written within state laws and regulations. It's a timeline that we will have to follow. And then the only other piece I would like to add is that Souser VOTEC, I mentioned earlier, 4 of their member towns are also considering overrides. I don't know if they are making, I don't know how they're making things contingent, whether the VOTEC budget is included in there or not, but there is a potential that VOTEC would also have 30 days to act, and the town would also have 45 days to respond. So I believe all 4 of those town meetings are around the same time, so we should at least have some clarity calling a potential future special town meeting to deal with the rejected budget.
So for me, a big takeaway here is that we won't be voting on a contingency budget at town meeting. We'll be voting on the override at town meeting. If it fails, or if it fails at the ballot, then we're going back to have another town meeting to then reassess and vote on a contingency budget.
And that really serves two purposes. So one, it's a lot easier to understand at town meeting. You're voting one budget that has recommendations from the finance committee, but also it respects the authority of the school committee to assess us a budget. Because if we were to make an assumption about what their contingency budget would be, and then they vote any number other than that, they have a rejected budget, and we would have to call a special town meeting anyway. So this cuts out that assumption, and also if Hanson assessed a different number, a lot of things come into play with that. So it is a lot simpler to pursue it this way, and it gives the school committee the authority to assess us on a potential rejected budget when we get there. I thought that this one was important, and again, because these will be up online later, that QR code will go to our assessor's website where you can seek information about these. But these are some of the tax relief opportunities that we have within the town of Whitman. A number of Chapter 59 exemptions, as well as a senior circuit breaker, which we are senior circuit breaker, which is the state process, and senior and most recently veteran tax work-off. It is currently a $1,500 work-off credit, actually it might be $1,600, but the select board at our next meeting plans to raise the rate of pay to increase that to the state cap of $2,000. And then recently, a taxation aid committee was formed based on a town meeting vote from over 20 years ago. It just adds another opportunity to seek help for those in need. And then I wanted to give an opportunity if any of our department heads up here with us had anything to say, and then Kathleen, obviously. So I'll turn it over to them. Yeah, okay.
Okay, so I'm Kathleen Otina. I'm the chair of the Whitman Finance Committee. I've been on the committee for 6 years, and I'm going to make this brief. Those of you who attended town meeting last year will recall there were 3 budgets presented for Article 2. Select board recommendation without override, select board recommendation with override, and then finance committee recommendation, no override. It was a very confusing process, but at the end of the day, town meeting voted to follow the finance committee's recommendation. At the end of that fiscal year, I was elected chair of the finance committee, and we didn't want another confusing fiscal year. It's going to be a tough enough sell in terms of the budget to explain things to people. We didn't need the finance committee and the select board at odd ends. So I, Mary Beth Carter, Sean McCain, and I began meeting in August, September, October to discuss, these were not closed door, behind the scenes deals, to discuss our different perspectives, because Sean and I, quite honestly, come from 2 different, almost 180 degrees separation on issues. But we also respected each other. We listened to each other. So what we have done this year, we being the Finance Committee, is we have met 15 times since November 19th, virtually every Tuesday night, with all of the budget department heads to have their budget presented to us, and we took notes to figure out what was the reason for their requested increases. We also had 3 joint meetings with the Board of Selectmen in January, February, and March to keep the dialogue going. And in the course of the Finance Committee's deliberations, we came up with 25 explicit questions on Article 2 that were emailed to Mary Beth Carter, and she followed up with answers to us. And then 35 explicit questions on the school budget, despite the fact that we can't cut the budget, the school committee has autonomy. We needed to feel confident that at least there was an explanation for the increases in the school budget. So those were emailed to Jeff Simonek and Steve Marshall, the school business manager. Those were all answered. And so we're going into town meeting having had the time as a committee to review Article 2, to understand why the increases were requested, and we supported them. We also did a lot of work with the capital articles. Don Essen, who's the chair of the capital committee, came in and explained all of the capital articles that were being requested. And because we have the free cash to fund not only the select board's financial policies, but also the capital requests, we will be able to fund all of the capital requests with free cash this year. So that's just background for how things are different this year. We've had a much more open dialogue between the Select Board and the Finance Committee, and we're confident that you have a lot of questions and that we'll be happy to answer any of the questions tonight. Thank you.
Good evening, folks. Jeff Simonak, Superintendent of Schools, and I just want to say thank you to the Finance Committee and the Select Board here in Whitman for putting together joint meetings where I was invited to actually sit at the table and see what has transpired. As Ms. Otina said, I think our school budget gets scrutinized by the 10 members of our school committee, and then I always get questions from Ms. Otina, and this year was 35. And I know Mr. Kane also looks through our school budget, and members of the community look through our school budget. This budget that we presented, I think, gives our students the best opportunity to be successful. Is it more expensive than last year? Absolutely. And the handouts that are in the back are all for you. It's all about the school budget. There's the school budget presentation from February. There's an FAQ for yourselves. There's the contingency budget to look at. And I actually did a pie chart of where the costs go within the district. For our students. Things are more expensive this year. Costs are up. This is the budget that we presented. And if the override doesn't pass in both communities, and it has to pass in both communities, there will be a level of service that is taken away. We looked at a $2 million cut reduction, and I thank the Whitman Select Board for putting a number up so I could work with it to give the school committee an opportunity to review that to see where those cuts would come from. It's teachers, it's administrators, it's curriculum. I'm not just asking for fees in athletics. If the school committee approves fees, there's going to be a reduction in costs for athletics just because it's going to be a district-wide hit. And there's quite a few pieces that go into that. Staffing increases, contractual increases, and we're in negotiations this year, and I think they're fair negotiations. But we're in negotiations, and you see across the Commonwealth where teachers are negotiating contracts. It's a fair negotiation. I can say that for a fact. It's not breaking our bank. Special education costs, and we, in this forum, I'm going to say, we educate students from 3 years old till 22. Some folks just think K to 12. We have a preschool that's designed for special education students who can qualify at 3. And then we have students in our post-grad program, 18 to 22, if they don't achieve a high school diploma, and they're special education students. We also have a number of students that we can't control, and I know Justin and Sean said, out-of-district costs. If there's an individualized education plan or an IEP, and that's floated out all over, if there's a cost associated with transporting a student to somewhere outside of Whitman-Hanson for specialized education, we own that cost. Now, the state does give us some reimbursement for that, and it's called circuit breaker. But the state circuit breaker doesn't match our costs. And I know our representatives are fighting for us to achieve or get more in circuit breaker to balance that cost off. Insurances, as Justin said, we are also in a group that we're not paying a 15% increase. I think our increases went up 7%, but that's more than last year. Everything is up. Operational costs, electric, gas. The piece of the regional school district that is different than our localities of Pembroke, Situate, Abington is we do all our own operations and maintenance. So our custodians are within the school district. That comes from the district budget. Snow removal, facilities, that comes from the district budget. Technology is within the district budget. And those are employment costs and benefits as well. So if you have an opportunity to look through these documents, if you have any questions, please, on our website, there's a school committee email. You can email all members of the school committee or individuals, or email myself, the assistant superintendents, or the business manager, and we can get you those questions asked. No worries at all. So the opportunity to review the documents and ask questions up until the time of town meeting, up until the time of the override, or any time, we've been more than happy to answer those questions. Thank you.
have to go way up on this one, sorry. Yeah, so thank you for coming. This is actually a bigger turnout than kind of we were anticipating, which is good. It would have been nice to see actually even more people coming out to kind of get educated on the process. I've been going through this process since 2012 when I was appointed as the deputy chief, and now I'm your police chief since 2019, and the job hasn't gotten any easier. I can really only speak on the police department budget because that's what we try to do is try and maintain our services year after year after year. Currently, we are not fully funded as far as services go. So every year we have to decide which shifts we're not going to fill. So any particular day we might be shorthanded just because we are underfunded. And that happens year after year after year. The problem is everyone's vying for a piece of the pie here. My department, the fire department, the school district, so on and so forth. As far as loss of personnel, should this override fail, that's going to be a dollar amount, and we're going to figure out how to best navigate that, and it could be a layoff or two at the end of the day. I'm not sure what the number is exactly. At this point, that's going to be up to you as the residents of town to decide which way you want to go. So traditionally, over the years, we don't fill between 300 and sometimes up to 800 shifts, depending upon the situation. We've had a number of people be out on extended leave, and that dropped our manpower significantly. So those are the 800 years. Just to give you a perspective on it, 244 shifts is what an officer is scheduled through the year, and that's our minimum. So we're shutting off 244 shifts. That's a loss of a body. That's equivalent to a layoff. We don't have the funding year after year to meet that goal to have all the shifts fully funded. So that's how we kind of navigate it. That's how we make it happen. On a bigger picture, on the town side for sure, there are three bigger budgets. It's the police department, the fire department, and the DPW. The smaller departments, you either have to shut them off completely, and that's like basically a drop in the bucket here and there, so you would have to stop a number of services, or you go to the bigger departments and they take a bigger hit. And that's what we've been doing year after year, and that's how we manage it year after year. There is a cost to it. Every officer who goes out shorthanded, they're not able to fully do their job on any particular day. And what we end up doing is we end up now having to call in people and to manage any emergency situation. We can't predict when those are going to happen. And so that also drives up the budget. And at the end of the year, on some years, we come back looking for money. Last year, it was $90,000. We put 4 people through an academy. That is never in the budget because it's not always an annual cost. So moving forward, that's going to be happening on a more regular basis. So that's one of the things that's driving up the police department costs. And here we are. So at the end of the day, we're going to navigate this to the best of our ability as department heads. And we're all going to try and figure out how this works as we've done in years past. So I'm going to turn it over to Chief Clancy, and then if you have any questions specifically, we'll get to stick around.
Just one thing that's really hit me hard about dealing more with public safety in my role. When officers have to go out, whether it's police or fire, and their shift isn't fully staffed, this is a major mental health and safety risk. You know, I've got to know this more because I'm dealing with it more, and the research is clear. When we don't fully staff the way public safety should be staffed, it's a mental health and it's a safety risk. Burnout increases, and the way that services that we expect, it isn't the same. It's a major issue that really needs to be, you know, it's got to be under a microscope, and more people have to pay attention to that.
Tim Clancy, your fire chief. I want to first start off with, this has been very concerning this year. The members of Whitman Fire Rescue have a long history of protecting the citizens of this community, whether it's fire and EMS. The last couple of weeks, we've had 2 fires. The members have performed professionally and with pride, extinguishing those 2 fires and limiting the damage to 2 houses. One of those houses happened to be one of our members who was working's parents' house. Mr. Can was just talking about traumatic events. I don't think there's anything worse than responding to one of your family members' house for a fire or a medical emergency. In both those cases, one of our ambulances was at the hospital, dropping our staffing to 4 people at the station responding to a house fire. We were fortunate that those ambulances were able to clear and respond, and the members did an outstanding job, acted with professionalism, and minimized the damage. One of the things that we face all the time is the members routinely come in off duty. When we do multiple calls, members come in from home. They are not required to come in from home, but they've made the commitment to this community. To come in, they staff it, and we're able to respond to extra emergencies as they come in. One of the biggest challenges with this, and we do not know the numbers yet. We've heard a few different numbers on what we will reduce our staffing by. That being said, if we reduce our staffing on my shifts, there is more than likely we will not run the second ambulance. That has a trickle-down effect of, if you're the first emergency, you will be getting members of Whitman Fire Rescue to your house. If you're the second emergency, I cannot guarantee you'll be receiving members or getting members from Whitman Fire Rescue to your house in a timely manner. The other aspect of this is the young firefighters, as was said, last in, first out. These are young, vibrant firefighter paramedics that committed to this community with anticipation that they were going to work for this town for their entire adult life for 32 years. And now we're being told, you might not work here now. The market now is that those young, vibrant firefighters will leave this community and go to other communities. A lot of communities are facing this. Communities that border us are in challenges right now. But part of the problem is once they leave, they will not come back. I would anticipate the challenges and the fear of losing their job in the future would be enough to make them not come back. The other aspect to this, as we lose staffing, we lose that ambulance, we lose revenue. It's uncanny in this town when the first ambulance goes out, and there's members at the back of the room that can attest to this. When the first ambulance goes out, the second one goes out shortly thereafter. We do multiple calls all the time. Once again, relying on people to come in from home, leave their families, and come in from home. I don't know what's going to happen in the future. I've been in talks with other communities around us that are facing similar cuts that are possibly only going to run one ambulance. Our mutual aid comes in a circle, closest farther out. I cannot guarantee you where those ambulances will be coming from in the future if all these cuts go through. The budget deficit, I understand, is a challenge. The biggest challenge with this is, it was on the slides, 2017, this town passed an override to hire 3 firefighter paramedics, and they had managed to come up with the money for a 4th, which brought us staffing up to 6 members on shift, which was an increase of our department. We had not seen an increase in our department since the 1970s. The concept of dropping members and going back to 5-person shifts is taking us back to the 1970s. This community is not the same community of the 1970s. There's also some contractual obligations that will fall in line, which also could significantly limit our ability to put members out on the road. I hope you can support this. I understand it's a challenge. I'm a taxpayer in this community as well. I understand there's some concerns. But our ability to provide service is directly proportional to our budget. Every year I sit with Ms. Ottino and the FinCom, and I plead my case for more staffing, more equipment to move us progressively forward. And I always tell them the same thing. I'm a snowstorm or a blizzard or a hurricane away from destroying my budget. That's how close our budget is on any given year. I start paying attention to a reverse budget the second week in July to see where we are, where we're going to track, so I can track and trend it to see where we're going. There is no fluff in the fire department budget. The expenses and the budgets, we will work within what the means are. But as I said in Capital and FinCom the other night, I do not have the option when a piece of apparatus breaks to go, I don't think we're going to fix it. I have to fix it so it can be in service. And the whole goal behind having our ambulances and our fire trucks in service is to provide the services to you and your family that you need, and most importantly, expect and deserve. Thank you.
I don't see Bruce here, but I see Kevin. Did you want to speak on behalf of the DPW at all, or? Sorry to single you out, Kevin.
Put me on the spot.
definitely put me in the spot. I wasn't, didn't know I was talking, but certainly appreciate everyone coming out tonight to, hear about, the issues that the town's dealing with. The DPW, similar to others here, looking at the same similar things. If the override doesn't pass, we would lose manpower. We just got fully staffed within the last year or two. We had a challenge of finding candidates that wanted to work for Whitman DPW. We worked with the town in our last contracts, and we're able to do some things that got some young, new talent in, similar, what Chief Clancy was saying, guys that, we hope work their entire career with us. We have an amazing staff, great workers. I work in the construction field. I see what these guys do. We do a lot of work ourselves. The crews do it, curb, sidewalk, paving, things that a lot of other towns don't do. And they got to hire someone. Everybody knows you hire someone, it's more expensive than doing it yourself. So we'd be put in that same predicament. Things would have to, be altered. I don't even know what it would be, who it would be, what departments. Everyone loves the park. They do a great job maintaining the park. We maintain a water and sewer system in the town. Pump stations, the water lines, breaks, all those things we do ourselves with our crews. And, losing anybody from that, affects that. So I would encourage everyone, we all live in town, I live in town. We certainly appreciate the support we've gotten with a beautiful building that hopefully everyone will be able to see towards the end of the summer. But I certainly would, encourage everyone to, support this override. Thank you.
And I just wanted to highlight one quirk with the Department of Public Works budget is that the Park and Highway Division is funded within the general operating budget, but the Water Sewer Department is funded out of water and sewer rates. So all of the cuts to close an operating deficit would have to come from the Park and Highway Department, which really doubles up the impact on what is a smaller department. So, Mayor Gott, do you have anything?
Mary Beth Cotter, Town Administrator, and I really think this is a fantastic turnout for our first forum, and I'm sure we have two more scheduled, April 23rd at the Council of Aging, and on May 1st here again at Town Hall. So thank you all for attending tonight to learn more about where we stand. One thing I did want to say is the directive to the town hall, not town hall, but all town departments, was to submit their budget with level funding their line items and, of course, contractual increases and so forth for the salaries. But these budgets really are already lean. And before I even could look at with the select board and discuss any kind of reductions for the deficit that we faced, I first went through the entire budget with a microscope and cut back everywhere possible to keep the reduction in staff or positions to a minimum. So, we are facing, the deficit stands right now at about 1.697 million, but that's with 340,000 already factored in for revenue from free cash. And I just want to touch on free cash for a moment. Free cash was used last year, and when you use free cash, it does put you further behind the following year. So the department, DLS, the Department of Local Services, has information out on free cash. And it says, as a non-recurring revenue source, free cash should be restricted to paying one-time expenditures, funding capital projects, or replenishing other services. If a community incorporates free cash into revenue source projections for next year operational expenses, it's prudent to place a percentage restriction on the total free cash to be used. So free cash should not be used, one-time money, for the recurring budget every year. We are using a tiny bit of free cash, 340,000, I shouldn't say a tiny amount, but some free cash for the budget, and the reason we're doing that is 200,000 is going towards our pension liability for the Plymouth County retirement, and as Sean had mentioned, that is a big item in our budget. It is expected at this time to be paid or fully funded in the year 2030, which we have hopes that at that point, if they don't extend it out another year or two, that will free up quite a bit of money in possibly up to $3 million in the budget. So I do see light at the end of the tunnel. The other amount that we're using out of free cash for the budget is $140,000 that we fund our OPEB, which is our other post-employment benefits. And that's $140,000. We put it in every year, and that money really was earmarked from the meals tax that we put into place several years ago. Now, these are important to fund on a regular basis every year, and our rating services, when they rate our bond rating, they look at that, and that's something that we don't want to stop doing. That's a very good factor for our ratings. We want to maintain a good bond rating so that when we go out to borrow, we're able to do so, and we've had a very stable, healthy bond rating for many years. So it's very important that we fund those two items, and we did this year put into place a free cash policy. And free cash does fund all of our capital for the schools, our capital for the town, our roads, sidewalks, money goes towards that. Any new vehicles that are needed, this year it's 2 cruises, and there's a vehicle for the fire department. There are repairs and things needed at the police station and the library and the Council on Aging, and it's very important that we take care of our town, our buildings. So to use free cash for the budget, other than for the 2 items that we have planned, is not, a good method. It's not recommended by the Department of Local Services, and we want to make sure that we're still able to take care of all of our capital needs each year. So thank you, and if you have any questions, please let us know.
Sorry, just a quick follow-up. This is an extremely difficult time for our community. I couldn't think of a better leader to be walking us through this. Mary Beth Carter and Kathy Keefe. Mary Beth's from the community. She cares deeply about the community. This isn't a business kind of venture. She really has the best interest of the town at heart. She works more than anybody I know. She's extremely thorough. Some of the questions that you ask her, I think there's been some feedback like maybe we're not quick enough to get answers. It's because Mary Beth Carter is so thorough and doing all the calculations so precisely, she wants to give the right answer. So I would like to thank Mary Beth Carter for leading us through this difficult time. The second thing about free cash. I think the use of free cash that we're using right now, the $340,000, is in line with our financial policy, and that's why I support it. I will not support using more free cash. I will not. As a select board member, I will not raise my hand. I think some people think, we're proposing an override, but really, if things, worse comes to worse, they'll find an extra $500,000 and kind of make it work. That's not what I'm going to do. I will not raise my hand to use more free cash this year. I think we feel pretty strongly about that. I feel pretty strongly about that.
Okay, and we have time to take questions from the community. I think if we can do this orderly, we can line up at the mic here, sort of one by one. I know we want to make sure that you're captured by the audio for cable access and the video. So, Rosemary. And identify yourself as if town meeting for the purposes of the recording. Yeah. Yeah.
My name is Rosemary Raquel, and I am on the Works Committee. I want to start with a statement and then recognizing that this budget is actually very responsible. And if you look at what we were told, and I was going to be asking you to speak to this, this is way, 5 years ago, we were told we needed to go override. That we're here 5 years later is remarkable. Financially, you couldn't get more conservative. I'm going to throw my husband on the bus right now, because when he comes in and we say override, he has a knee-jerk reaction. And he says, oh my God, taxes, taxes. But things cost. Some things have a cost. And what you're looking for is for people to look at giving the best bang for their buck, but actually providing good services. If you're coming in 5 years later, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, half the amount, I do think that everybody who worked on this, selectmen, superintendent, everyone, that it needs to be recognized. You've got to get past your knee-jerk reaction. It's hard, but this is the cost. And you don't have anybody doing something wrong in terms of, spending too much. You have people really working to make sure that they've got a leash on that spending. And this is where we're at. And this is where we should have been years ago. So we need to replan it. Also, we recognize that our assessor's office put together things to protect our most vulnerable citizens when we made this move. Because they knew this was coming. They put together in collaboration with the selection, they put together the most comprehensive protections for senior citizens and vulnerable citizens. So we can move forward with this in confidence that the truly vulnerable will have protection. Well, we protect our other vulnerable citizens, people who might have a heart attack, people who might be having mental health crisis or addiction issues in our police, and our children as they begin their future civil lives. Now, I asked you to sort of talk a little bit about what we were told it would actually cost by a professional, I think Sean can ask if we can come in, by somebody professionally who assesses what it costs for a town to roll forward with no additional cost. We told you it was close to $5 million. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so we had a slide about this at the beginning of the presentation, but John Madden, a former finance director in Duxbury, came in, did an analysis of our expenses, of our revenues, made a number of recommendations, but the bottom line recommendation was that we would, he expected at current spending levels that we would need to seek an override of $1 million back in fiscal 21 or up to about $5 million in fiscal 25. And I see the chair of the Budget Override Evaluation Committee coming up to the mic, so I don't know if he wants to add anything to this or has another question.
Hello, everyone. Is this working? Check. Hello, everyone. My name is Randy Lamatina, 6 Riverbird Circle, if we have to get into that. Up until about a year and a half ago, I was on the Board of Selectmen, chair for a short time, town spoke, and now I am just a frustrated citizen trying to get answers. I really didn't think I'd be up here too much. But we go back to this 2019 Madden report. This was a committee that I was the chair of from start to finish. We started that summer very early in the summer. All of our meetings were televised. There were basically bi-weekly or at least monthly updates in the Express. And a couple things have been severely misrepresented by the gentleman behind me. The purpose of the Madden report for 2019 was to look into one thing. Would the town need an override for the next fiscal year? Multiple meetings, again, televised, people got the information, and it was a very broad makeup of that committee. We had department heads, we had citizens at large, we had members of the school committee, not always agreeing. Gentleman John Madden, who former finance director in Duxbury, extensive municipal history, was brought in for a nominal fee, and he worked with the town. And what was determined was that the town did not need an override for that fiscal year. However, he did say, without following certain practices, that within a 5-year period, the town would need an override. So we knew we were getting in there. One major factor of that report that hasn't even been mentioned, and if you go back, you can watch these meetings on YouTube, is that his findings would significantly change if the assessment method to the school district changed in Whitman's favor. That was a $1.9 million uptick to Whitman when we changed to the statutory method, which was a method that some will argue we were never told about, people didn't know about it, but it had been in effect in some time, and it eventually got sorted out. Like I said, that was a $1.9 million shift to the town of Whitman, significantly changing that 5-year path. Also, what came out of that was the select board, through Mr. Madden's recommendations, got a basic guideline of some fiscal financial policies that if we adopted would then produce a more sustainable budget. If we want to go back to the strategic plan, which I also was a member of that committee, would produce sustainability, of which, and I haven't heard a thing about it all the meetings I've watched this year, a unanimous vote that year of the Board of Selectmen, and I don't believe Mr. Kane was on it yet, but Mr. Evans, Mr. Bezanson, Mr. Salvucci, and Dr. Kowalski, a unanimous vote was to adopt the fiscal policy of limiting our department increases to about 2.5% and the school district assessment to a 5% maximum. It has not been followed. I think this year the school district is 9.67%. He also makes reference in the report, I think you can find it online still, of yes, there would be anomalies within those years that if the town realized that it needed certain positions. One that was mentioned earlier was regarding police reform. It really wasn't a police reform issue at the time, but what it was the change in FOIA requests due to the muckraker lawsuit that basically produced a large, massive uptick in FOIA requests that the police department was getting. I want to say that was about a $20,000 increase at the time to the police department to have somebody to staff to handle thousands of FOIA requests that people were presenting to the town that had to be properly answered. So that was some of the little anomalies that may come up. Where the town, I think, in the last couple of years, we haven't added many positions. We've changed some positions, and I think if anybody who's driven by the library, we now have somebody that can actually oversee large projects. And I use the library as an example. If you remember the color it used to be, you drive by it now, it looks incredible. It's because we had a town employee that, again, for not a lot of money, a slight change in position, oversaw that project, is on top of these day-to-day capital issues, which we didn't have before. We had somebody that had a job description and, again, just took more and more of a role on. But sometimes when that happens, you don't necessarily expect to have somebody that's your job, let's make sure it gets done. So it's been small increases. The largest increase was actually an increase of 3 firefighters. At the time, I was the vice chair of the finance committee. And it went round and round and multiple meetings. Again, I would say nothing was kept from the public. There was several selectmen's meetings with the fire chief, former Chief Greno, explaining his case. The finance committee had a position. All these questions were answered, but ultimately the townspeople spoke. And they said, for the services we want and what that brings, yes, we will pay the $344,000. I believe that's what it was, about $344,000. But what also, and as humble as he was tonight, is having that second ambulance in service to our town, the ambulances bring in close to $1 million, $1.2 million in revenue to the town, of which, again through Mr. Madden's recommendations, there was a change that a portion of that money would stay with the fire department for large purchases, such as ambulances. Luckily, the town, through COVID, was able to purchase them, saving a little bit more money and adding to that for a next fire alarm purchase or new sets of gear. But that is a revenue producer. And again, he was very humble tonight. If there is a decrease in fire service, that will amount to more of a decrease in revenue to the town. That's something to be very cognizant of. I'm a little frustrated because as a former fireman, I have been in this position. I was laid off. And I can't tell you, we talk about friction and trying to make things smooth. I'm still very friendly with a lot of department heads. And the friction of just putting numbers up, of it might be 8, I don't think anybody, unless you've been in that position, knows the tension, the friction. These are people that we're 3 weeks away from town meeting. Nobody really knows what's going on, and it's not always first in, first out. There's several variables in public safety. If you're a disabled veteran, you cannot be laid off. So our departments are not large. So you could be talking about somebody with 6, 7 years on getting laid off. Again, very humble this evening, but Chief Hanlon, I know he talks about we're not able to fill shifts. Well, let me tell you what exactly that means. The town of Whitman at any given time on a full shift has 1 patrolman in dispatch, a supervisor of that shift, and 2 patrolmen on the road. So when he says we can't fill a shift, that means there's only 2 people in this town on the road handling domestic violence, drunk drivers, breaking and entering. 2 people. I mean, we are not talking enormous departments that can say we don't have a guy tonight, but there's still 7 or 8 other people on the shift. Again, I come up here tonight with a lot of frustration. I'm sorry to keep the time. But it was a great impassioned speech of not using one-time money. It would have been great to hear it last year at town meeting when the Board of Selectmen, there were multiple budgets last year, and the Board of Selectmen were steamrolled by a recommending body, and that's what the Finance Committee is. Article 2 is a selectman's document to be prepared typically by the town administrator and her assistant, or his assistant at the time was Mr. Lynham, and then they make recommendations on that. But unfortunately, it's great, and you made it last night on the selectmen's meeting, and you made it tonight, but it would have been great to hear it last year at town meeting, and not one single selectman got up to oppose it last year. So, no, you shouldn't use one-time money for anything. One-time money should be used for single occurring costs. That's it. Very similar to the ARPA and ESSER money and CARES money that was funneled into the school district, all for full-time positions. So if you wonder what the giant increase is that nobody wants to talk about, is you're now picking up that one-time federal and state money that was funneled in and used for full-time positions. And folks, it's $1.7 or $2 million. We really don't have a number right now, what exactly the override's going to be. And this is going to be tough for a lot of people to hear, but I will not vote for an override this year. I will not support an override for one simple factor. it doesn't fix it. What they're not telling you is it's $2 million this year, it will be $2 million fiscal 2027, and then close to another $1.5 million override in 2028. The plan should have been to fix it. I took a lot of heat early on as we got into budget cycles. Why aren't you working on this in August? Why aren't you working? Why are we? Well, we're 3 weeks out and nobody knows what's going on. So I put that same question back on the current selectmen. It doesn't fix it. If you would have watched a couple weeks ago the selectmen's meeting, I believe that night was probably one of the most informative ones we've had recently. We had the fire chief, we had the police chief, the selectmen, almost a full board, almost. The town administrator. They kind of laid out what the plan to fix it was. And if you watch that, you got a pretty good feeling that the fire chief was behind a larger override to fix the problem. The school superintendent was behind a larger override to fix the problem. The town administrator was behind a larger override to fix the problem. And it seemed like several selectmen were behind that. And then a recommending body unanimously votes that they only want a 1 year. Well, what were they actually recommending? It seems like they're now setting policy. And that is not the way it should be. You were elected to be leaders of the town. Not make the decisions, but lead in the right direction. And I would say a $1.7 million override this year is nothing but a Band-Aid, and it's the same as just throwing one-time money at the problem. So it would be great in the next 3 weeks if you actually came up with a plan that fixed it. Because the slide that shows us third from the bottom is the lowest tax rate is really nothing but smoke and mirrors. Folks, the DPW building has not kicked in yet. That will be about a 12% increase to your taxes. The Whitman Middle School is a 23% increase that has not kicked in, but you've already voted on it, that you will see on your taxes. The Social Votech we voted it. It is another 20 to 23% increase to your taxes. So that slide where they stand up here and say, we're low from the bottom, our tax rate's low, no. On paper right now, but it's coming in all by 2030. Thank you.
Did you want to talk about the Sorry, I just get deficit projection for this one. Just give me one. Yeah, sorry. And yeah, just to answer Mr. Lamatina's question at the end there. So the with a $2 million override this year, there's a projected excess levy capacity of 300,000 in fiscal 26. In fiscal 27, there's a projected deficit of 587,000, not too far off from what we were at last year. And in fiscal 28, a deficit of $1.8 million. So, yeah, we have not solved the long-term problem.
My name is Nova. Did this get turned off again? Hello? Hello?
Take a second.
Okay, great. My name is Anna. I live at 100 West Street. I don't know if we have to do that at these meetings. I do not have a speech. I just have questions. And just to set the stage for my questions, I'm hoping to disseminate information, positive information about why the town needs the override. So my questions about more information aren't challenging. They're more share with me something so that I can, as I share more information, that I have more to go on. Okay, well, my first is not that kind of question. You said that we will only be voting on the one budget at the town meeting, which sounds great. It was very confusing last year. Is Hanson doing the same? Do we know?
I don't.
Okay. So there's a potential that they will vote on some alternate budget and that will be set in stone and it'll be like a whole cascade of other problems.
So most towns would do a contingency budget when they vote this. We are breaking the norm by doing the one contingent budget.
Okay.
So
Okay. Well,
knowing
it
nothing
sounds
about
good.
Hanson, my assumption is that they would be doing two budgets, but I don't know that for sure.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Can you speak to why did you elect to do a 1 year instead of a 3-year override?
If you have the time, you can watch the March 25th Finance Committee's YouTube video. The 8 members spent an hour discussing 1 year versus 3 years. And several of us started off supporting the 3-year, and several started off supporting no override. But the discussion really boiled down to what is most likely to pass. And the arguments were really sound. And as I said earlier, I have 4 new members of the Finance Committee who've done a lot of work. They've worked very hard to up the learning curve. And some of the things that they spoke to were true. Fiscal 27 and fiscal 28 are projections. New revenue may come. New state aid may come. There may be new developments in the town. So we can say with certainty what the fiscal 26 numbers are, but there would be some uncertainty, projections, with some basis, sound basis to them, that the committee we unanimously voted for to support a 1-year override, acknowledging that the fire chief, the police chief, and the superintendent of schools had just left the joint meeting with the select board, recommending the 3 years. So we were sensitive to those arguments, but we just thought the 1 year has the best chance of passing.
Okay. And then maybe the superintendent can answer this question, but why can't the school district this question came up as a response to the person who was speaking previously, why can't the school department keep to a 5% increase? I know COVID happened since the Madden report was initiated, in which the 5% was recommended. What other factors like inflation makes it so creating a level budget that asks for 0 increases beyond 5% kind of impossible? Do you want me to hand? No. Yeah. Okay.
So a 5% increase of the assessment is really like a 2.5% increase of our overall budget. And if you look at most budgets that are going forward right now, keeping to 2.5 is with factors outside of our control, cannot happen. The other piece,
Factors.
special education costs. If you want to just look at the first page of the FAQ,
Okay.
that'll break down the expenses for this year. However, also in Chapter 70 revenue, which was referenced before, my increase, so if you look at my overall budget, I get X amount of dollars from the state and X amount of dollars from the town. We put together a budget that might increase 3%. The state will give me an extra $150,000 for this. So where does that come from? It comes from both the towns. If the state equaled what we were asking for and matched, 5% assessment would be across the board, maybe even lower. But I can't look at that. So this year, our Chapter 70 money is a little bit more, okay? So if I look at $500,000 coming in revenues projected, because the budget hasn't been firmed up by the state yet, they also pulled $250,000 more in charter school reimbursement from me, because I have to pay charter school costs. So it evened out to about a $250,000 increase. I know our representatives are working on that. A couple of years ago, it was a $35 increase per pupil. This year, they're looking at a max of $150,000. That will help our budget balance out. But we won't know that until July or August. So we pass our budget in May. These are the projections that we have. Okay?
Thank you.
Absolutely.
And then I just want to clarify with the DPW, my understanding of what he said was that hiring outside companies would cost more than maintaining the staff we have who can provide the town services that was that accurate?
Yeah, and so I mean, I can generalize this, and Kevin, if you want to add anything, go for it. But usually, it's cheaper to do it with in-house talent than outside. So
Yeah.
the town gets this year, it's about $500,000 in Chapter 90 money to maintain our roads, repair them, pave them. If we don't have to contract that out to an outside company, we're going to get more bang for our buck.
Right.
And so if we reduce staffing, we'd have to contract out more, and our Chapter 90 money wouldn't go as far.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then for the fire department, so a question that just came up with the last person who was speaking, it was a statement that he made. I just want to verify if it's true. Is it true that decreasing services through the fire department would decrease revenue to the town?
Currently, the projection for the ambulance is $1.4 million in revenue. That's between the two ambulances, so 100%. If we don't run the second ambulance, there will be a decrease in revenue.
So decreasing staffing actually decreases our town revenue?
Correct.
Okay. And then, again, this is not a challenge. It's more like I just want to be able to say when I tell other people, how often are there more than one or more than two emergencies in the town? Because I think it's a really,
I don't-
important thing to say that, if one person is having an emergency and then you have a heart attack, like who's coming for you?
Well, that's the main challenge we'll face. I can't predict when the emergencies will happen. I will tell you that it is more frequent than not
Yeah.
that when the first ambulance leaves, that the second one does too.
Yeah.
Or there's a call for a fire or something along those lines. Very infrequently do we do a single call. Most of the time, it's multiple calls. It's just how it's been over the last several years.
Okay, thank you. And then for police, you said that, when you reduce shifts, there are fewer people out sort of responding to things. So could you give like a real life example? So when you were speaking, you mentioned about like the health and safety and the mental health of the staff people who are out responding to these calls, kind of going it alone, and how much harder that is for them. So obviously that's a point that answered that question. But like, what does it look like to not have shifts totally full in our town, like given our town problems, just so that I can speak to that?
So the first challenge is deciding when to do that, and we don't know when emergencies are going to occur. So what ends up happening is we run a shift short, and then we have to call in additional resources who aren't there on hand. Your police department wants to do the best job that they can all the time. So if they're stretched thin and they're frustrated all the time, that doesn't help us out at all. We also do multiple calls at a time. If we only have 2 officers on the road and there's an accident at 18 and 27, they're both going. One's
live right by
gathering
there.
information, the other one is directing traffic so we don't have another accident. Now, if there's something else comes in, we don't have anyone to send. That's frustrating to the officer. That's what generates the issues, much more than anything else. And that's what decreases morale. And so that's really what we're facing. There's very few times where we're not either, and that's just, you respond to the scene, you see the officers out there. That's not the end of it just because they left. Now they're going back, they're writing reports. If they have an arrest, they're booking the person. We have to monitor them in the cell. And so that all drives the cost up. And so that's all at overtime rates. So I can't just arbitrarily say, okay, we're not filling this. I have to fill as many shifts as we can. And
those are projected based on like past instances of how many people you expect to need to reduce costs overall by not having to like contract out for other people coming in.
Yes. So, we have 2 people in the academy now, and so we will be hopefully fully staffed. That's going to be temporary. It takes about a year to train an officer from the start of the academy, or the selection process at least, through the academy and then field training. That's about a year-long process. And so we can't send people to the academy without having a position open for them.
Right.
So the challenge there is a person retires on day 1, it's going to be another 300 days before we put them back out on the road. So we're going to be shorthanded anyways, and we don't have the money to cover that because it's not in the training budget, because In the past, we haven't sent anyone to the academy, year after year, where we're going to incorporate it into the budget. That's how lean we are as far as the budget's concerned. Does that
Yeah,
answer
that-
your question?
Yes, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, again, I guess in my role, I've had to deal with this more directly, and it's something that has been eye-opening. The human side of public safety, like to go and interact with something that's very traumatic, and then to have to leave your job and then implement some sort of self-care and potentially take care of yourself and then go back to your job. But if you're getting called back in and those sorts of things, it's really difficult. So again, I can't say enough about how important this is. Can I add one piece too? It's okay. I think what's going on tonight is excellent. I think people need to ask questions, and you can ask hard questions. And, this is a very difficult time. It's important for us to hear this feedback. It's important for us to hear people who are supportive and giving us feedback and people who aren't so supportive. That's what we're here for. You know what I mean? In my experience, people who are confused or they don't have have lack of knowledge about what we're doing, and they aren't able to speak and they aren't able to come and get information, that resentment builds. We want to have it out, in a respectful way, obviously, but
Absolutely.
don't feel bad if you want to go up to the microphone and you're like, I actually kind of have some negative feedback and I want you to hear it. It's okay. That's why we're here. We want to have this at the forum. We want to discuss it. Any feedback about tonight will help us with we have another two more forums scheduled.
Yeah.
So if you would say, could you change it this way or add this, that'll be helpful for us moving forward. Thank you.
That makes sense. And then I didn't know, does this budget, if the override doesn't pass, does it affect the library or the Council on Aging? That was my last question.
Yes. So there are, if I go back to that slide.
Oh, okay. Sorry. There you go.
Yeah, so within the general government budget, there is cuts to both departments, although in the scenario we're working on right now, we do not close either one. There may be loss in hours. The library is running right at the minimum hours it needs to be open because we've added population recently, but there are definitely positions at risk in those departments.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Beth Stafford, 21 Harvard Street. I'm school committee chair. I'm also the chair of the Whitman Middle School Building Committee. I'm up here because I'd like to give the townspeople some good news for a change. Our building committee right now is $15 million under budget and on time. So we were able to submit to the SBAB, who fund us. So the project being at 135 million is now at 120 million. So that was due a lot to the fact that when we were first getting our estimates, it was during COVID, prices were high. And then when the bids came in at the end that we just received not too long ago, everything was under budget from what had been projected. And what you need to know is it doesn't matter with the tariffs or anything because this is now a signed contract. And so, and we do have contingency money still sitting there, so don't worry about that. But I just wanted to put that out there because that's a big savings to the town. Granted, the $15 million isn't all to town because the state is reimbursing us for 1%. So they will take some, but it's still multi-million-dollar savings for the town of Whitman. So I just wanted to give you that good news. When we're hearing all this sad news, I thought that's a good news for everybody to hear. Oh, I'm sorry.
Hello. Hi, my name is Scott Figgins. I'm president of the local firefighters union in town. Just wanted to say a couple of things. First, I want to echo what the fire chief had to say. Fire chief's absolutely right in what he's saying about staffing. Over 50 years ago, we had 5 members on duty answering about 400 calls a year. We're up to 6 members per shift, and we're answering close to 3,000 calls a year. That's a significant increase to our staffing, toll on our members. Obviously, like the school department says, police department says, they all have standards. They have to meet those standards. We also, as the fire department, we have national fire protection standards that we also have to meet. Doesn't mean we get the money to meet those standards. Doesn't mean we meet those standards. I don't think we've ever met those standards since I've been alive, which is over 50 years, I'm sorry. And that's understandable because the money's not there. We understand there's a large population in this town where people are on fixed incomes. We understand that. We live within our means. We protect the town the best we can. We do what we're given. But to go back in staffing, we're never going to meet those standards. You're supposed to have 4 guys on a fire truck going to a call. You're supposed to have 16 guys show up to a reported house fire. We show up with 4, 2. Very rarely we show up with the 6 guys that we have with us. We've put on our social media multiple times in the past year. It's just a little bit of what we're doing. When we have multiple calls and 4 or 5 guys are at the hospital and there's 1 guy back at the station covering the town by himself. And like the fire chief said, area towns are going through the same thing. They're all having problems with money. They're all having issues. We're supposed to meet standards such as responding to a call within 8 to 10 minutes. If we don't have the staffing, it's hard to make those standards now with 6 guys. If we're going to rely on mutual aid, those times responding, if they can respond, are going to be 12, 15, 20 minutes, if they do come. 2004, we cut our staffing. First week into the fiscal year, we had an accident, person in cardiac arrest, and nobody showed up in the town of Whitman. And then it took 20 minutes for mutual aid ambulance to get here. So just to reiterate what the chief was saying, this is not the direction we want to go, but we're trying to meet the town's requests. We're here to protect the towns. But we're doing almost 3,000 calls a year, and it's taking a toll on the department and the members of our department. Just one question I had for the town administrator. I saw the numbers tonight. I don't know, I haven't done the math yet, but the school department has, throughout the entire school department, has about 500 members. The fire department has 26 members. I believe the police department has 26, 25 members themselves. If there is significant cuts to the town, we will be laying off 3 or 4 firefighters, 3 or 4 public safeties to each department. I don't know the numbers, but that's about 20% of our department. And there's 14 teachers being laid off to 500 staff members. I'm not saying it's not right. I don't understand the numbers, and I don't know if you have those numbers. But if you don't have those numbers tonight, can you have those numbers for the future meetings to understand where the percentages come from and why there are significant cuts to public safety?
Sure.
Considering the staffing.
Okay. So, for the fire department, we're looking at 1 position to be reduced. For the police, we're looking at 1 full-time and then 1 reduction. And for the DPW, we're looking at 2, possibly 3 positions. So for the scenario that I'm strongly considering, it's 1 firefighter, 1 full-time in the police department, and then 1 position that may be reduced in hours.
Rich McKinnon, President of the Professional Firefighters of Massachusetts. I represent not only the Whitman firefighters, but firefighters across the state. I'm honored to say I'm also a Whitman firefighter. My question kind of stems from that answer. Are you giving the department heads the leeway to make these cuts? Like if you just said we may lay off 1 firefighter, but if the department head who knows how to operationally, that's me, I gotta go, but are you giving the department heads the leeway to make the cuts that they need to? It might not be...
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
So beyond the department heads to do?
Correct. So if you don't mind. There is one thing, I want to mention. You're here for information, and I know that if weren't in this role and I wasn't familiar with the budget for the town, I would want to know some of these questions. So we put together some numbers here. First of all, I want to say that the DPW building project, the debt has been bonded, and the first year of the debt was already factored into the taxes for fiscal '25. So that is in your taxes at this time. The tax impact for the debt exclusion, and for the debt exclusion items, that would be debt on the police station, the debt on the new DPW, the debt on the high school, and the debt on the new Whitman Middle School. So for fiscal '25, the difference for the average homeowner that has a value of $495,736.78 based on the fiscal '25 valuations, and that's the best number we have to go on, even though I project out some future years here. But for next year's debt, this is without the override, the increase in the taxes for the average homeowner is $248.12. That is the result of the Whitman Middle School going out to bond this May. That's the projected debt payment spread over the town. So that's an increase to your taxes of $248.12. From 26 to 27, the increase would be about $14.25 for the debt exclusions that we have on the books. And from 27 to 28, it would be an additional $20.17. Now, just to clarify that, the override would cost $372.66 for a homeowner with a valuation of that $495,000 figure. What's not in these numbers is the remainder of the Whitman Middle School project. So they're going out for $30 million, but there will still be approximately $40 million left to bond. So that will be coming down the road. And also, we all know the South Shore Vote Tech project passed. That the town will put forward for a debt exclusion next year. These numbers that I just gave you, they do include the police station debt, which will be rolling off the town's books. 27 will be the last year, so there will be no debt payment in the assessment in fiscal '28. The DPW, which is brand-new debt that just started last year. The Whitman Middle School, the town was assessed for just the ban to borrow $8 million, and that was about $431,000 that was on the assessments last year. But for fiscal '26, the first major bond payment will be factored in to those numbers that I mentioned. And let's take a look. The South Shore VOTEC, I do have there's nothing that will be assessed for fiscal '26 for the ban, but they are going out again for a ban. That's a bond anticipation note. That's really short-term borrowing before the school actually secures the long-term borrowing and locks in the money that they need for the project. So for '27 and '28, there's just a small amount for bans, and that's factored into the numbers that I had just mentioned. Then the real debt for the South Shore VOTEC, that will probably hit in '29, half of it, and '30. They'll probably go out and borrow in two different tiers, although that still could change. But that's what they're looking at right now, according to Tom Hickey, the superintendent of the South Shore Regional VOTEC. So you're looking at about a $248 increase in '26. Then the override amount would be in addition to that. So I would want these numbers, and I just want to be transparent and give you all the information and estimates that we have at this moment. Okay?
That's for the year, right?
That's for the year.
Right.
That is for the year, correct. Yep.
And that's based on the median price.
That's based on right, that's $495,736.78. If your home is higher, then the assessments will be higher. If they're lower, your assessment would be lower. Your taxes would be lower.
One more question. When you just said about the DPW building, that is just the interest on the bank, correct?
No, not for 25. It was the first payment on the bond, and so 26 is the second year. Yep.
What would 28 be, do you know that?
What the debt payment would be? Let me take a look.
On the median price home?
I'm sorry?
On the median price home?
On the median price home. For the, let's,
Can you just repeat the question for the cable?
oh, okay. The impact on the DPW, that's what you're asking for 26 or 27? Okay, so well, I'll just say for 26, it was $289.62. For 27, $281.70. And 28, $273.78.
We know that these numbers can be difficult to digest, so we're trying to put together, we'll put together a slide so you can see it in a, we'll share it so that for the next forum, you guys are able to digest this more thoroughly at home and see it in a visual. Still kind of working on ways to be able to describe this well, and then so people can understand it and ask more intelligent questions. But it's not the easiest thing to, because there's so many nuances about the debt exclusions, it's not the easiest thing to just say. We need to come up with a visual that will accurately display what we predict is going to happen with the debt exclusions in a way that will help you understand how much it's actually going to cost you. So we're working on this now.
And so, yeah, to that point, this has several assumptions in there, among them being how much the middle school is going to borrow in the second round of borrowing and at what interest rates. But this is a projection at this time for the tax impacts over the next couple of years, baselined against fiscal 25. And you can see each of the different excluded debts across the bottom, as well as the proposed override in orange at the top.
Hi, Dawn Byers, 20 Russell Road, school committee member for 6 years, parent of 2 Whitman-Hanson Regional School District graduates, and I'm here to share some information that I learned during the budget process. So this handout is available, and I hope you will take it home tonight. First, I'm glad, Mary Beth Carter, thank you for mentioning the South Shore Vocational debt on that building. One fact that may have gotten lost in translation about that debt is I want to commend 2 Whitman Finance Committee members last year, Rosemary Conley and Kathleen Otina, for recognizing that the regional agreement with the vocational school locked in Whitman's debt last year at our enrollment at that time, which was about 25% of the school. That was going to lock that in for 30 years. There was conversations, and it was brought to the attention of Dr. Hickey, and if you were at the fall town meeting here in Whitman, you may not have even realized you voted a new regional agreement to the South Shore Vocational School, which lowered that debt commitment for all taxpayers in Whitman, because it's now based on a rolling average of enrollment. And that school has added the town of Marshfield. So it does significantly shift that enrollment percentage. So while that small green bar up there is small, it could have been larger going forward. So I just wanted to bring that up. Regarding the Whitman-Hanson school budget and the Madden report of 5%, if you have your book, the district budget on page 12 of 12 does say it's a 5.3% increase. So yes, the budget is increasing at 5% itself. The difference is that on page 10, excuse me, I have the floor. On page 10, the chapter 70, state aid, you'll see, for the regional school district is 40% of our revenue. So 40% of the budget with state revenue is not going up 5%. So unfortunately, increases with the school budget do need to be paid by the member towns. So I just wanted to point out that a large portion of the school budget does not get increases from the state. I do want to share, as Superintendent said, we are maintaining services that we have. So if you look on page 2, maintain, maintain, maintain. We are not adding any programs. We are not. We want to keep the class sizes we have. We want to keep the staff we have for the benefit of the students. If we lose staffing, class sizes will increase. It will significantly impact the education to children in the town. On the second to last page, I think my only critique of the budget is maybe it could have been larger. Some of these graphs and writing is small. But there is a multi-year projection in the back. And under FY26, it does say Whitman's assessment, $20,600,000. It comes in at $20 million. I'm sorry, let me see. Flipping back here, finding my pages. The assessment, 20.9. So it's very close to the projection. We are on target. My last comment, if I'd asked for your help as citizens of Whitman, I called my legislators today. I'm asking for your help because there is a Senate bill. It's H4010. It's regarding regional transportation. We are short by $413,000 reimbursement projected for regional transportation. On page 6 has the school bus. It talks about the total reimbursable expense that the district has for our school buses right now is $1.6 million. Those are eligible transportation costs that is written in Mass General Law should be 100% reimbursable to the district. We're anticipating 75% because historically it's been 75 to 80%. That would be $1.2 million. There is a bill on the floor that would fully fund that line. So Senator Brady, if you are willing to reach out to him, again, it's H4010. The funding comes from the Fair Share Amendment. It's the millionaire's tax. That's an action item we can all do to take advantage of that. It was put before our state representatives, and representatives for Whitman-Hanson districts voted no on this amendment line. I've reached out, and I'm waiting for answers for follow-up on that. But I appreciate your support of this budget. I will vote yes on the override, and I thank you for coming tonight.
And just real quickly, we had planned on wrapping this up at 9, so if anyone who hasn't asked any questions yet has any remaining, please come to the mic. But for the sake of the town employees' time and cable.
My question has to do with debt structure. I know when we decided to borrow for the first time, there was a very responsible approach of trying to reduce the overall by having sort of front-heavy borrowing. But maybe, can we reconsider that now that we're looking at a lot of overrides? Would it be smart to reconsider it and have it go longer with, maybe more over time, like it's like a 40-year loan, you'd say, opposed to a shorter time? So, and I know that comes back to the school committee, essentially, so I'm also asking the school committee about that in collaboration. I again want to thank everybody. I think Don mentioned the debt for the VOTEC. I want to thank everybody for working really hard on this. I know there's elements that will say this costs more and that costs more. Really, when we look at percentage per capita spending on all of our departments, we're not spectacular, guys. Nobody's overspending. We have some of our, what I consider immediate needs are average, like average police, slightly below average per capita. This is something when I was on Finance Committee, I would review every single year, and it was really responsible. So I just want to, again, thank everybody, and they've been able to do this without the override 5 years ago. I also listened, because I was on Finance Committee, to read the Madden report, and some of the things that were said here contradicted what it said. I don't want to get into it, but I want to thank Ms. Byers for also being on that override committee and representing it more accurately.
May I get up and say?
Yeah.
Give me a second, I don't work fast enough. Thank you very much. Hi, my name is Dennis Schick. I lived in Whitman since 1944. My wife and I live up on Lance Avenue, and our house falls into the bracket that would add $337 to our real estate taxes, which would bring the total to about $5,000. That means that my first 3 Social Security checks will pay for my real estate taxes. That's 25% of my income, and I'm sure that follows for almost every senior citizen in this town. So when you look up there and say, well, $330, what the hell, that ain't much. It's a lot to people like me. Thank you.
All right, I think that wraps it up. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. You've given us a lot to work with. And enjoy the rest of your evening. Hope to see you at town meeting on May 5th and vote in the town election on May 17th.